Yeah, let's do it. Okay, very good morning, everyone. I am Charlotte Hamill, COO of Born Social, and you're tuning into our final event in our lockdown series. Hello again to all of those who have joined us previously, and a big welcome to anyone joining us for the first time. Now, before we get started, firstly, I really encourage you to make the most of our super panelists through the Q&A function that you should be able to see at the bottom of your screens. These guys really are some of the best social brains around, and they're at your fingertips. So fire them your questions, because we have some time at the end to get through as many as possible. Secondly, you regulars will know that we'll follow up with a recording of the session and links to the slides, because you'll definitely want to pour through them at a later date or share them with your teams. And because it's the last one and we are feeling so generous, we'll also include links to the previous events in the series in case you missed them. How about that? Okay, so this morning is a highlight reel of the 10 juiciest, most valuable takeaways from our last 5 events. We are covering everything from social strategies in a crisis, pivoting towards e-commerce, lo-fi content, embracing TikTok, social and gaming, the death of influencers, and more. It's seriously jam-packed, full of gems for you. And delivering these pearls of wisdoms, we have some familiar faces. We have Strategy Director Callum McCann, Senior Paid Media Manager James Saki, Senior Strategist Essie Nomanen, Strategist Ilana Green, and Senior Creative Charlotte Ryan. So hopefully everyone's sitting comfortably, because we are ready to get into the good stuff. First up, we have Essie Nomanen on influencers. Essie, take it away.
Brilliant, thanks, Shah. So I'll kick us off with lesson number 1, which is on influencers. And why I find it interesting is because there are almost 2 sides to the influencer story during COVID. So on one hand, influencers have seen their sponsorship deals and partnership deals shut down. Loads of events have been cancelled, and they haven't been able to travel the world as they used to, which has left them in a very difficult place. And it's not just those travel influencers that we usually see traveling around the world, but it's also your luxury and lifestyle influencers as well. Because at a time like this, I think our lifestyles have changed drastically. So we're no longer after that highly aspirational travel content, or, I guess styling the perfect outfit or seeing the outfit of the day photos as we used to. And that's what influencers really are. They are drivers of that aspiration. And when our aspirations shift, the need for influencers does as well. And that is kind of the other side of the influencer story. So those who have been able to shift their outlook and provide people and brands with something useful, whether it's a home workout like Joe Wicks, or whether it's just new recipes or helping hand on how to make your banana bread, those are the people who've seen a rise in popularity over those who simply exist to I guess sell branded goods. And the second nail on the aspiration coffin, as I'll call it, influencers have received quite a lot of backlash for not being able to navigate this very, I guess, sensitive environment that we got going on. So whether it's influencers like Ariel Shawness getting a lot of backlash for, I guess, talking about the way that she's experienced coronavirus, or whether it's people standing up for Black Lives Matter, some of them have seemed very much out of touch with reality. So they've come across quite tone deaf. And I think that's in a time when all we want is something real. It's just basically hasn't been the best look for them. So the key point here is that we still need those role models that we can aspire to. But I think our idea of aspirational and aspiration has drastically shifted. So we need people who have meaning beyond just your aesthetics and outfits of the day. And the new aspiration is very much shaped around community, generosity, and I guess social improvement as a whole. So those sort of people with authenticity and skill and ideas and creativity in general, who are then able to express themselves in a really honest manner, who are very relatable, and essentially just have a bit of a point of view, I think will come out of this much stronger. And equally, I believe that brands have the responsibility to partner with those who provide some sort of a tangible benefit, not just an image. So overall, lesson number one, so it's not the end of influencing, but it is the end of influencers as we know them.
Thanks, Essie. Next up for lesson number 2 is Alana Green with live streaming. Alana.
So at the beginning of lockdown, it felt like every single brand was turning to live streaming on social. There was a whole host of brands sharing tutorials, hosting virtual meetups, or entertainment shared on the small screen. It seemed like we had schedules to tune into every single day. And the platforms really took note. Instagram Live increased by 70%, seeing more users tuning in April versus March. And Instagram added the ability to watch this live content on desktop or even share these streams as IGTVs, so you could watch back at a later date. And some brands used it as an excuse to broadcast longer form content. Although it's great to see things like theatres exposing a wider audience to their art on social, is that really the best use of live? Now, possibly not, because the best use of live social takes advantage of the intimacy that it can create. Whether it's watching the likes of John Legend at home, playing the piano, and he's singing in that exact moment where it feels like you're the only one listening, it's that personal experience. Or you're watching brands having conversations with influencers or experts, and you know that you can ask a question and you can get that answer in real time when you're watching along. And we've seen a whole host of restaurants, big and small, hosting cook-alongs or wine tastings with a stream to really help that viewer get the most out of the experience. And that's what builds a connection between a brand or a personality and their audience. It's how we allow social to feel like a shared experience or a two-way conversation. So our lesson 2 is think of live streaming as an opportunity to be in the moment with your audience. It's that way to create those intimate or exclusive experiences on social.
Love it, Alana. Now it's Charlotte Ryan talking TikTok.
Hi, can you hear me? Oh, thank God. Sorry, a little bit of a confusion there with muting. Thank you, Shar. I'm going to talk to you about some TikTok, which is my favorite thing. So yeah, TikTok has seen huge growth in users over the past couple of months. In particular, in lockdown, UK installations went up by 34% right at the beginning of lockdown, and had a lot of brands kind of wondering, you know, is this a platform they should approach and how they can get involved with it. So I'm going to look at the 3 main avenues that a brand can use to get into the platform. The first is through advertising, just your usual ad formats. The second is through posting organic content, so that is content that sits on the brand's feed on TikTok. And the third is through using creators, so borrowing their credibility, getting them to make content that makes that features your brand or talks about your brand. So to give you a little bit more context, here's some visuals. So the first ad on the left is a piece of ad content for a brand called Boomf. And this is a piece of content that would appear in the For You page along with other usual organic content, but there's paid media behind it. And so this can either come in the form of high-end kind of polished, similar to your Instagram stories kind of look content, or it can be a little bit more native looking, such as this piece from Boomf. And the second one, the organic content, this middle one here is from Chipotle. This is a kind of challenge that they created. It gives you kind of like an insight into behind the scenes of the workplace. I also know that some brands like to use a kind of a face of the brand to get involved in all their organic content. But then there are other brands who just use anyone who wants to get involved. And so it doesn't just even need to feature a person. It could just be, it depends what your product or service is. And finally, through using creators, this piece here on the right is from EA and it was to promote The Sims. This is a challenge that they got creators to do, kind of putting different outfits together and stuff like that. This is a great example of how sponsored content using creators could spark a trend in the challenge and get more people on board and recreating your challenge. And so I'm going to leave you with lesson number 3, that TikTok is accessible for brands and is even more accessible now in the kind of when we're coming out of the post-lockdown world, and that brands shouldn't be afraid to get on board with all these different avenues to approach it with.
Great stuff, Charlotte. Next up is The Great Pivot with James Saki.
Hi guys. Yes, I'm going to take you through The Great Pivot today. So one of the things that we've seen in, I guess, in lockdown is that online spend on retail sales has rocketed up to 30%, which is the acceleration of a trend that we kind of started to see over the last few years. But I guess the kind of lockdown environment has forced people to look to online as a way of accessing the products that they need, which poses an interesting challenge for businesses who haven't necessarily been set up in that way to take advantage of that, but also kind of rely on in-store or retail sales for coming into shops and paying from them that way. One such example is Top Cuvée, which is a restaurant and wine bar in North London, kind of cater to the local community, selling wines, doing dinner in that hospitality sector, but they haven't been able to kind of sell online before. Lockdown posed a kind of challenge to them because they actually needed to kind of diversify their revenue streams to actually stay alive during the last few weeks. And so they changed Top Cuvée to Shop Cuvée, which was an online restaurant selling ready meals, deli items and wine delivered to your door. And the impact of this was really interesting because we looked at their follower growth over the last few weeks. And what we saw was that originally they were kind of on a lower level of following, but when they changed over to Top Cuvée, they actually had a massive jump in the number of followers that they have on their social channels. Now, we would normally say that following isn't necessarily the best measure of kind of business results, but when you are a kind of local neighborhood business, the number of people who are following your page is a pretty good indication of potentially interested customers. And so this was a really interesting and positive sign that they have been able to adapt to the new reality that they've been facing. And actually we spoke to them and they said to us that the decision to pivot was made out of necessity, but they've actually grown their customer base during lockdown, and social media played a huge part in that. So they're looking to keep up with e-commerce going forward, and they're going to ensure that it's a mainstay of their business in the future. And so lesson number 4 is invest in e-commerce now to see the benefits of long-term growth in the future.
Brilliant. Thanks, James. Now we're heading back to Essie, looking at acts over ads. Essie.
Brilliant, thank you. So moving us on to lesson number 5, which is on something we talked about quite a lot since the very beginning of the crisis. And it's the fact that brands need to prioritize actions over comms. So I think very early on during the pandemic, we saw that there was this real need and a real expectation for brands to, I guess, act beyond their usual means. So whereas normally consumers tend to not care a huge amount about what brands say or do, during crisis, the expectation is really to use the power that they've got for good. And it doesn't just mean lowering their prices or doing something for the consumer, but also keeping people informed about how the organization is supporting their employees and what are they doing for the, I guess, the wider benefit of the community as well. You know, it might be the wider industry that they're operating in as well. And also at a time when the public haven't been hugely satisfied with the government's actions and what they've been up to, they've really turned to brands to partner with the government and relief agencies to address the crisis. So this is from the Edelman Trust Barometer that came out relatively early on in the pandemic. And I think one of the first points when we really understood how much people are expecting from brands at this very difficult time. And instead of just sending an email telling us that we are all in this together, like we saw from many brands over the first couple of weeks, brands actually started to take action as well. So we saw loads of different executions, with Iceland first starting the elderly shopping hours that loads of supermarkets then jumped on, and brands like Guinness and Kovberg donating to the wider hospitality community. And obviously loads of brands giving discounts to NHS workers as well. And what I thought was really interesting is that I saw some data from YouGov for the big four supermarkets, and basically looking at their social impact initiatives. And actually they found that there is a direct correlation with their, I guess, social initiative and positive word of mouth around that particular brand as well. So, yes, it's doing good, but it actually does have a tangible business result tied into it as well. So whether it's kind of using their supply chain for alternative purposes, or actually using their physical store space for charity, or whatever it is, I really, really hope that brands have learned to think a little bit differently due to this as well, and actually just understand the power of, I guess, action just over words. So yes, it might have taken a kind of a global pandemic for certain brands to understand this, but I think that we've got somewhere. So lesson number 5 is that empty comms will get you nowhere. You need to act.
Thanks, Essie. Callum McCann, over to you for lesson 6.
Yep, morning everyone. I think one of the kind of common themes that we're seeing across all of these lessons is that coronavirus hasn't necessarily caused new things to happen. It's just kind of accelerating shifts that were already happening previously. I think that's true when we look at the role that social is playing within the wider marketing mix. If we look at this, a survey amongst CMOs in North America and UK, it kind of looks at the different channels and where spend's going. And social marketing has been taking a bigger and bigger slice of the pie over the last few years, but it still hasn't been seen as, I guess, a lead channel for brands. TV often still has that for bigger brands, but I think what we've seen over the last few months is social really stating a claim for that lead channel status, for a couple of reasons. Obviously social has been the place that has had the attention during lockdown, as people are stuck inside with their phones and their devices. That's the place that they're going, and kind of existing media plans based on TV and out of home were less relevant. But also we've seen kind of the undisputable effectiveness of social first content during the pandemic. There's so many examples, but things like Joe Wicks in his living room with just a tripod and a phone getting reach that most brands would dream of, kind of shows the power of social as a platform. I think it's been a real watershed moment for this approach, and one of the examples that I like the most is from L'Oréal Paris. So normally known as quite a traditional kind of high-end advertiser, TV first. During lockdown they pivoted their approach, so worked with Eva Longoria to film this kind of at-home tutorial, which really it got a lot of press around it, got a lot of talk around it, and then they pivoted that into a TV ad, which has been kind of had a lot of spend behind it. But it shows this kind of social first approach in its truest way, starting with a piece of social content and then adapting that for TV and other platforms. I think it's a really good way of approaching it. So I think what we've seen is that social during the pandemic has really proven its creds as a lead channel. It can play that role. I think more and more brands are going to be viewing it as that moving forwards.
Thanks, Callum. Now we're back with Alana for gaming.
So another area that has seen huge growth over the past few months, in even the past few years, is gaming. And the amount of players are exploding and the range of people interested in gaming is ever changing. Where previously it was quite male focused, it was a little bit niche, and we're actually seeing broader opportunities that have been accelerated in lockdown. The latest version of Nintendo's Animal Crossing was released in March, just as quarantine went into effect in a lot of countries over the world. And we can see a correlation between that time, between lockdown, and the surge of both Google searches for the game, but also sales, where we've seen 13 million copies sold of this latest version. And there's something that is really interesting about its adorable aesthetic. There's a play focus on community, bringing people together, kind of swapping vegetables and playing with other people. And there's a positive escapism that has really thrived in this time. And seeing such a rise in players, a lot of these gaming platforms have experimented with some interesting activations and brand experiences over the past few months. Early in lockdown, Twitch hosted a Stream Aid, which was an all-day festival with gamers, sports stars and musicians, all to raise funds for the World Health Organization. And just last month, Christopher Nolan premiered the latest trailer for his new film in Fortnite, another way of reaching a new audience with a slightly kind of gaming adjacent activity. And in Animal Crossing, we've seen everything from players chatting to celebrities, streetwear collections being dropped, and virtual islands for holidaymakers that have been missing out on the true experience. Games have really become a virtual stand-in for real-world experiences. So there are vast opportunities in the gaming landscape, with the ability to create a virtual interaction or reach all of these different communities. It's a platform that a lot more brands should be considering in their social strategy going forwards.
Interesting stuff, Alana. Now, James has another e-commerce lesson for us. James.
Hi guys. So one of the things I was looking at in terms of how trends have changed over the last few months is is how people have been way less mobile recently, and so the way that people are shopping has changed massively. You can see here that there was a massive spike in people looking to buy products online rather than people looking for directions to kind of get out and about, whether that's to retail locations or various other places. And so I actually looked at one of our clients who sells fitness towels to see whether, I guess, the change in consumer behavior had meant a decrease in performance overall. And what I saw was this was the kind of ad that we were running previously on social. So it's clearly set in a gym or fitness studio. It shows multiple people exercising together, and it specifically calls out gym goers in the copy as a kind of final prompt to get people interested. But what we found was that because people simply weren't living their lives in this way and weren't able to kind of identify with the way the product had been advertised, we weren't seeing the results that we were looking for in terms of performance, really. So we had to change this and think about other ways in which we could address our audience in the way that they needed to be spoken to. And so we changed this creative to something that looked like this. You can see here that there's a really clear stay-at-home theme. You've got images which have clearly been shot in a living room. Somebody is working out in their own home, which is much more in fitting with the way that we were all living our lives during March and April, where we were only allowed out of the house for an hour to get some exercise. We've gone as far as to swap that gym goers copy to home workout essential in the headline as well, to give that final push around relevance for being in the home. And the results of this were pretty clear to see. By making these changes across the business, we managed to achieve a higher overall revenue in the same period in 2020 than we did in 2019, which was a really, really positive result for the client in question, but showed the value of being really flexible and adaptable in the creative that you're running for your performance marketing campaigns. And so lesson number 8 is be hyper reactive and adapt your creative to what you think your users are going to see.
Nice one, James. Now for another creative learning from Charlotte.
Hi, thanks, Shar. I hope I'm not on mute this time. So I'm going to have a look at what content potentially will look like moving from COVID times into more lo-fi future. So I think COVID really forced us to change how we produce content. We couldn't shoot in studios, work with talent, shoot on location, stuff like that. And it really forced us to kind of lean into what platforms were originally made for, and give the audience some more meaningful content, regardless of how it looks. And it kind of took a step back to the olden days of social media, kind of like back to 2011. Our feeds were filled with a lot more raw looking content, more point and shoot kind of content. And more back to the social aspect of it, being led by stories and by the community rather than by flashy content. And two brands that executed this really well throughout the lockdown period were Greggs and Tesco. This top one here from Greggs was How to Make a Bake. And essentially this works really well because it could have been shot in a studio, but it had the exact same kind of effect by simply just being a kind of point and shoot style on someone's phone. And this kind of style also worked really well for Tesco because they have that Food Love Stories series. And this is essentially putting the people first, the forefront of the content, and kind of this really strong messaging that kind of led the content rather than this slick imagery that wasn't necessary for this piece of content. Similarly, Skyscanner obviously couldn't really sell any product during this time, but they really made the most of what they had and kind of continued making content that really was keeping that momentum going, keeping people excited for when they could make future plans, and by reusing old assets to create new assets. I think they did this really, really well. And I don't believe that this is going anywhere kind of fast. Obviously we have access to studios again and our high-end content, but I do think that there is kind of still a segment there for point and shoot kind of content that's still relevant. It kind of feels like you're putting the camera back in the hands of the audience and the user and making it feel a little bit more raw and authentic. And if anything, moving out of lockdown and being able to do shoots again, it might make us a little bit more resourceful with every shoot that we do and getting the most from what we have. So my lesson number 9 for you is to always think of substance over style. I think moving out of this period, if anything, has just taught us that if your message and narrative is right, then the rest will follow, even if it is lo-fi or recycled assets.
Love it, Charlotte. Now, last but not least, we have Callum with Back to Social for lesson number 10. Cal.
Yep, great. Thanks, Shah. So final lesson is about how we're viewing social as a platform and how to get the most out of it. I think that over the last few years, there's definitely been a swing in terms of how we're seeing social towards the media side. So viewing it as kind of another media channel to get reach and eyeballs and kind of passive forms of engagement, which I think has on the whole been a really positive shift for the industry. It's kind of made us think about effectiveness a lot more and kind of how to get the most out of these platforms. But the interesting thing that's happened over the last few months is that we've almost, as a collective, rediscovered the social side of social media, kind of bringing people together, getting people to participate, getting people to talk to each other in interesting ways. That's what's really kind of taken over the last few months. So whether it's platforms kind of giving people new ways to connect through video chat and pub quizzes and all that sort of thing, whether it's groups, which has seen a massive surge over the last few months, both WhatsApp groups and Facebook groups and all other sorts, as neighborhoods look to connect and friends and family look to kind of stay in touch, but also more active forms of participation. So it might be watching live streams, but that is an exercise video, a cook along, as Alana was talking about, kind of more active forms of using social. I think what that has meant is that we've all kind of rediscovered this social side of social media. I don't think we should forget that as we move forward. The balance is kind of in the middle, using the media side to really drive results, but kind of thinking about the social side as well. So that's our final lesson.
Thanks, Cal. And thanks, guys. So that was great. So there we are, 10 valuable learnings from lockdown that can positively impact our longer term social. I have some questions for you. I'm sure more will come in. Don't be shy, everyone. Cal, we'll start with you. We've discussed this sense of community, and Charlotte also kind of mentioned lo-fi content, which is kind of social in its original form. Looking back, what killed this the first time round, and how do we hold on to it this time?
Yeah, great question. I think that when you look back at the way social has changed over the last 10 years, there's almost like a couple of eras. So we started in the organic era where kind of good content could fight its way into your feeds, and it was all about that really. And then kind of organic reach died, as we know, and paid media really took over, and you really had to be investing in paid to get results on your content, no matter how good it was. So I think in reality, the answer is probably somewhere in the middle. Yes, we have to use paid to drive really strong results, but I think we can still carry through some of the sentiment from how to create really good organic content that cuts through. I think the balance is somewhere to be found in the middle.
Nice, thanks. Essie, coming to you. There'll be a lot of brands working with influencers, whether it's on long-term partnerships or people that they've just have had historic relationships with, whose style no longer feels relevant. It's more of that old aspirational tone you were talking about. Can influencers rebrand themselves, do you think?
Well, I would argue that they always had some sort of a skill or a special kind of talent to begin with, and that's how they got into the industry as well. But potentially somewhere along the way, amongst all of the beautiful lattes and aspirational travel photos from the rest of the influencer world, they might have forgotten about it. And I think it's really just now the time to almost redefine what that is for influencers. And as I mentioned, I think it is a responsibility of brands as well to hold influencers accountable for what is actually the value that they are giving to people out there, what is the tangible sort of benefit that they are providing. So I guess when it comes to rebranding, I think it's maybe less about rebranding and more about like going back to why was it that you started in the first place? Like, what was the specific skill or a useful, tangible element that you wanted to communicate to your community out there, and kind of going back to that. And I think that is the way forward.
An interesting conversation for brands to have that conversation with the influencers they're working with too. Yeah, I love that. Charlotte, let's come to you now. You talked about lo-fi content. How challenging is it to create? Is it an art in itself?
I think that's a good point. I would like to point out that I don't think that lo-fi equates to low quality. So you do have to kind of have a bit of a knowledge of what you're doing. So, even if it's point and shoot on a mobile, you still kind of have to have an awareness of how to frame a shot and how audio works and all the things like that. And I think if you look at the examples that I pulled from like Greggs and Tesco, I think the lo-fi content is kind of elevated by appropriate like motion design and graphic design, and it kind of bookended by like a nice intro and outro text too. So you can't just, but for me, I don't feel that you can just throw up that kind of point and shoot content. It needs to be elevated in some way as well, if you get me.
Yeah, totally. I'll let go of my creative. Thanks, Charlotte. Ilana, you talked about live streaming. Now, we've seen a lot of live streaming over lockdown. Some people might say we're sick of it, just saying. But what have we learned about when to live stream and how often, so we're not overdoing it and it's not overkill?
Yeah, absolutely. We've seen at the beginning of lockdown, it looked like every brand was going live, and then people have dropped off over the past few months. Really making sure that the kind of content that they're creating and sharing has a meaning and feels a little bit more like an event or something exclusive that you can gain on social, because you have to tune in at that time. So you need a reason to join it. I've seen kind of bands that have released their latest singles and performing live at that time, or if you're having a conversation with a professional, knowing that it's timely, it's important, and the viewer is going to get something out of it, rather than just sitting and watching, seeing that it's not that interesting and tuning out. So it's about thinking about what you can give to the viewer and why they should tune in at that time, and make it feel special and feel different, rather than doing it just because you feel like you have to.
Yeah, great point. James, coming to you. You talked about the creatives in ads reflecting lockdown life, making them much more effective. What's your advice to brands on how to keep their ads creative in sync with their audience's lives?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think the example that I gave was kind of something that was performing really, really well end of March through to kind of mid-April because of the really strong restrictions that were kind of placed on us all. But we started to see now that kind of content start to drop off a little bit because obviously we've had some really good weather recently, although not in the past couple of days. And people have been allowed out and about a little bit more to kind of enjoy some of the summer, pubs, hairdressers, etc., starting to reopen. So we're living in a very different world, even now, to the one that we were in maybe a month, 6 weeks ago. I guess the biggest lesson from what we saw was that people essentially like to be shown product in a way that they understand. And the reason that that example did so well is because people were trying to find ways to work out in their home, and the product kind of fit into that problem that they were trying to solve. People are trying to solve different problems now. So I would say to adapt your creative, think about the ways that people are trying to live their lives in the current kind of lockdown environment, and try and reflect that in your creative if possible. So, right now it might be something like tennis that we would use those towels for because, the courts have opened and people are kind of starting to participate in, team sports at a lower level, that kind of thing. And then obviously just test to see, results.
Yeah, great advice. A theme we're seeing coming through in questions is kind of building on Etty's point around action over ads. Obviously, we've seen coronavirus, we've then seen the Black Lives Matter movement, and now we're seeing the bubbling of the Facebook boycott. And I think brands are struggling to necessarily define what's an authentic action for them to take. Do you have any advice for brands on how to decide what level of action or what type of action to take so that it is all authentic and doesn't seem to be seen as jumping on the bandwagon, even if it's a worthy cause?
Well, I think from my opinion, I think the best, examples, especially during coronavirus, where when the brand kind of aligned what they were already doing with what the charitable output was. So, for example, LVMH turning their perfume factories to produce hand sanitizer, for example. Like it's, they already had all of those resources, and it's just all about, actually thinking about a solution that benefits people. So it's, taking something that you already have and always had, whether it's a brand purpose, whether it's your supply chain, whether it's your physical, store space, and then using that for good. Also I think it was Heinz who, due to loads of schools closing, they donated 12 million free breakfasts for children in need, which again is a perfectly aligned cause to support, because Heinz have been, supporting our daily breakfast for however long. So it's, again, taking that, what is your underlying purpose, or what are those values that you've been preaching, and then taking that and turning that into action as well, which is something I would like to see more of when it comes to, Black Lives Matter and other movements in the future as well.
Yeah. Brilliant advice there. It's not an easy decision to necessarily make, but I think that line is spot on. Callum, coming to you, I've got a question around TikTok. It's been described as an entertainment platform. Should brands advertise and share content on TikTok if they're not actively trying to entertain?
Yeah, really good question. I think the answer is, for many brands, that we're still trying to discover what really works on that platform. I think the stuff we do know is that it's very different to the stuff that would work on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, for example. I think where we've seen success is in kind of treating paid as a way to slot in with that platform rather than to interrupt. So you almost want your paid advertising to feel a bit organic in nature. I think entertainment is a good way to do that for many brands, but it's not necessarily. I think you do have to kind of fit in with the way that TikTok works, the nature of the platform, some of the tropes, the kind of language that's used in order to fit in. Otherwise, you do kind of just get scrolled straight past. So yeah, I think entertainment is a good way to do that, but there's other ways to do it as well.
Great. James, I'll come to you on this because I know we've talked about it a lot internally at Bourne over the years and talked about the funnel effect. But someone has asked, how effective do you believe social media to be across the entire journey from awareness all the way to action?
Yeah, good question. I guess could be biased, but I would say very effective. Surprise, surprise. But the reason for that being, I think it comes down to strategy, actually, because we've seen that you can build a kind of a strong marketing funnel using just Facebook, and use that to grow your business from a performance perspective. There's, plenty of success stories within the agency of where we've been able to do that, scale those brands up to become household names. And I think that proves the effectiveness of the platform in prospecting to new customers, but also then bringing them down in the funnel and turning them into customers and eventually repeat customers of a business. And that works if you want to go down a kind of performance-led route. But equally, for maybe brands which are slightly more established, Facebook offers cheap reach at a cost which is well below many other kind of alternatives in terms of platform or channel, and that means it can be really, really valuable as something to kind of extend the life of other campaigns, broadcast messages out to a massive audience, which can be, as I say, bought at a very low cost, allowing you to kind of extend the reach of campaigns that you've been running previously, compared to where you might potentially put that spend elsewhere. So I think it's overall, it's doable for all the different stages, but I think you just need to think about what it is exactly that you need to achieve, whether it's one of the three objectives or all of them, and plan a social strategy accordingly that kind of leans into the platform in the way you want to use it.
Right. So it can be used for all three. It's up to you which one you want to lead into to make it. Yeah, dominant.
I think so. Yeah, I think so.
Love it. Ilana, one for you. I think with the rise of TikTok, it's allowing people or getting people questioning again whether this is another platform that they have to get on. Is it important for brands to be on every platform, or is it more authentic to pick a few that work for your brand?
I think there is a challenge and a difficulty in trying to jump onto every single platform, and then you end up spreading yourself too thin and you kind of don't do justice to the places that you're kind of present. It's all about thinking, what is your brand? What is your message? Who are your audience? And where are you going to interact with them in the best place? If you're a young and fun brand and your audience is existing on TikTok, you can create that entertaining content, play with it, see how it works, maybe try out a few influencers and connect with different creators and test the waters. But it is also that feeling of, if you're in multiple places, if you're present on a couple of different platforms, you do build up that hype and your audience gets to see you in multiple different places. But it's about leaning into where is right for you and creating that authentic message and that kind of true connection with your audience on social.
Yeah, agree. Thanks, Ilana. Callum, over to you. It's quite a niche question, but I know you're a podcast fan, and it does seem creating podcasts is something brands are really leaning into. So how would we go about incorporating a brand's podcast into their social marketing, do you think?
Yeah, interesting. I know that, that is a niche question. I know that Facebook, a couple of years ago, I think they tried to kind of get into the podcast sphere and release their own competitor. It didn't really work. But I think it's kind of similar to a classic funnel in a way. You kind of want to build awareness around the podcast, maybe using clips of it in videos. I think BBC do that quite well, using sound clips from their radio shows and putting them on across to social, almost the best bits to get reach beyond what the podcast platforms provide, and then keep the audience warm. I guess the challenge with podcast is the distribution is quite hard. Like it's hard to discover new podcasts within the podcasting apps. You have to use social to find that audience. I think the best role for social is really in kind of awareness and getting the audience to share and kind of getting in front of new people and that sort of thing.
Great, thanks, Cal. Nice advice. Right, I think we're going to leave it there. I'm sure everyone has 11 a.m.s they need to get to. Time for a cuppa in between, hopefully. So a big thank you to all of the panelists, and thank you again to everyone for joining. As I said at the start, in our follow-up, you can expect a link to the recording of this and the slides. Of course, if you would like to follow up with us, you can email us on shout@bornsocial.co.uk. That's it for now. Have a great day, everyone, and we'll be in touch with our next information about next events coming soon. Bye.